Welcome to my final 2021 college football season preview, looking at the SEC, the final Power 5 conference preview of my series that goes through all 10 FBS conferences plus independents. I have one more video coming out on the Sun Belt, another one on the independents, but this is the final Power 5 conference video, best for last because the SEC is again going to be the top conference in the Power 5, well, top conference in the FBS, obviously, bar none. I expect them to do great things. Top 5 teams, SEC teams in that initial AP top 25 poll, 3 of them in the top 10, which is the most of any conference, with the Big 12 and the ACC coming up second with 2 teams apiece in that. In fact, SEC can probably claim 4 teams within the top 10 because Oklahoma from the Big 12 is representing here at number 2. And of course, they will be joining the Big 12 at some point in the next 4 years, either in 2024 or it might be 2025. But I think 2024 was the official release date, but the conference is looking to try and add Oklahoma and Texas potentially starting next season. But of course, this season, Oklahoma and Texas still be playing in that Big 12 conference. SEC, a lot to preview here, a lot to look at. Of course, the conference that has sparked off controversy across the league, creating the first potential super conference scramble here, and threatening to pretty much disrupt the entire college football landscape. But that's all in the future. For now, we still have a pretty much regular landscape to look at college football-wise, so let's jump into it. Like I said in all my videos, the reason I started doing these is that every year of the last 4 years at least, I've gone through the Athlon Sports preseason magazine, and I've previewed on my own time, looking at what I think each team is going to do as far as overall record. At the end of the year, I've gone back and checked, and every year I've been better than Athlon Sports, so I figured about time to put it up on the channel. I'm excited to take a look here. It is one of the hardest seasons to analyze of any college football season ever, just because of what COVID did last year, really throwing a wrench into things, obviously, with some conferences across the country playing very different setups, with some conferences playing only conference only, such as the SEC opted to do, some conferences getting the game very late, Pac-12 starting their season about halfway through the year, and some teams in that conference only being able to play 4 games. So it's really hard to compare the conferences and the teams in those conferences across the whole nation, because every conference kind of played a different version of college football last year. SEC, always one of those top conferences there, so teams that did well last year, likely not a fluke from only playing a conference-only schedule, but it is hard to analyze because besides from the bowl games, where in bowl games everything goes out the door anyway, besides from the bowl games, there weren't any non-conference matchups to compare them to. So I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try. I expect to be off on a few of these teams. I'm going to go out on a limb on a couple of them, so stick around through. If your team haven't heard your team name yet, you might want to stick around because once you through the video, because I think you might be pleasantly surprised there, especially some of those late names I'm going to be calling here. But it is one of those hardest seasons to preview. I do expect to be off on a few of these. I expect to see some teams that I'm previewing as having great years or decently good years kind of throw in the towel here early and maybe show a pretty poor performance. And some of these teams that I'm saying aren't going to show up might prove me wrong. So let's see. I'm hoping to be pretty consistent overall, but it is going to be a very interesting season. It's really anybody's best guess as to how it's turned out, so you might as well hear mine. So here it goes. Starting off with Florida, number 13 in that preseason ranking. Last season 8-4, 11-2. Were really playing well down the stretch before they kind of lost their footing, or shall I say, blew a shoe there in the LSU game. The Athlon Sports is projecting another great year for Florida at 9-3, 5-3 overall. Of course, last season, like I said, ending the season on a 3-game losing streak. But prior to that, having a very good season, 8-1, with only a loss to Texas A&M, a close loss to Texas A&M, and even the losses here. I mean, so that loss to Texas A&M was only by 3 points. The loss to LSU was only by 3 points. The loss to Alabama was only by 6 points before getting blown out in the Cotton Bowl there. Oklahoma just more motivated to be there. Florida disappointed because they wanted to be in the playoffs. So this was a team that was really, less than 2 touchdowns away, with a 3 points plus another 3 is 6. So less than 12 points away from an undefeated season last year. So a team that played exceptionally well, especially against a good Alabama team last year. It is, however, a team that loses a lot of starters across the board. Only 5 starters back on offense and 4 back on defense. Losing Kyle Trask there, with Emory Jones looking to potentially replace him there. But losing their starting quarterback is going to be huge there. So it is a team that's going to look very different from last year's team. But I think that Dan Mullins has done an outstanding job with Florida here, really turning them into one of those top teams in the SEC, where for a while there, there. They're really kind of a middle pack, lower tier team in the SEC. So a team that I think, is a good enough coach. I think he's one of those top coaches in the nation, especially at least in the SEC here. One of those top coaches who's able to do great work regardless of who he's got here on the field, and I'm hoping to see another good year out of Florida. So I'm projecting 10-2, 7-2. That first game here, wins against Florida Atlantic and USF, should not be too much of a challenge. I do think that they'll drop a game to Alabama here, and I do think they'll drop a game to Georgia. But looking at the schedule over here, and I need to correct myself, it's not so much that I think this Florida team is going to be as good as teams in the past, but their SEC record, the draw that they got, is one of the easiest in the conference. Really soft SEC schedule comparatively there. They have, so just to read off their schedule, this is who they play. They play Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, LSU, Georgia, South Carolina, Missouri, and Florida State. Now, this is a schedule there with potential losses in the cards against Alabama, LSU, and Georgia. But besides that, I don't see anybody else here who's going to present any challenge at all. I think Florida's going to blow out pretty much every other team on this roster. I think they can beat LSU, who I think is going to have a little bit of another down season after memorably winning the national championship a couple of years back. So I think this is going to be another one of those teams that's having LSU teams that's going to be on a downward slide, and we'll look at them when we get to them. Georgia is going to be really good. I think they're going to pose a challenge, a potential loss here in Alabama. I think both those teams might be pretty big losses, pretty big margin of score differentials there. But other than that, Florida here has an excellent chance to go 7-2 SEC and 10-2 overall. Excited to see what happens here as they push down the stretch. All right, so moving on to Georgia, that team that I said was going to be excellent, 8-2 last year, and they were really close to a much better season than that, with a loss to, say close in that they had the two losses. The losses they had were pretty big, but down the stretch they are playing exceptionally well. Of course, JT Daniels coming in and having an exceptional start down the last part of the series there when he took over the starting job at quarterback. I think he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC here. Athlon Sports is projecting 11-1, 8-0 overall. I'm going to agree with the 8-0, but I'm going to do them one better. I think it's going to be a perfect regular season here. If they open up against Clemson, no Trevor Lawrence this year. I'm not as high on his backup. I'm not going to try it. I have difficulty pronouncing his name, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by giving a shot. If you want to hear me embarrass myself, go watch the ACC video where I did try to pronounce his name. But I'm not as high on Clemson's backup. My wife is a Clemson fan. We watched all the Clemson games, and I was not as impressed by his performance as other people around the country were. He's a top pick for the Heisman this year in a lot of preseason projections, but I'm not on that bandwagon at all. Georgia coming in, Kirby Smart, probably not as good a coach as the Clemson coach over there. Probably not as good a coach overall, though they're both great coaches. So it's a matter of small margins, small degrees. I do think that the Clemson coach over there is a better coach here than Kirby Smart. But just by a matter of degrees here, of course, Georgia going 52-14 under Kirby Smart over the last 5 years. I do think that Kirby Smart is an excellent coach. But I think that with the roster that Georgia returns here, returning the starting running back, starting quarterback, 7 starters back on offense, even though they do only get 4 starters back on defense. I think that the Clemson quarterback, even if he's good, is going to be still getting his feet underneath him. I think it's going to be a really close game, but I think that Georgia can go play Clemson there in Charlotte, North Carolina, and get the win. After that, it's a pretty even stretch on the road. UAB might pose a small challenge there. They're going to be a good team out of Conference USA this year, but they shouldn't be an issue to a team like Georgia. Wins against South Carolina, Vanderbilt. I'm not going to win off every win here because I don't really see anybody challenging them on the schedule. They don't have to play Alabama at all on this schedule here, so that is a big relief for them pushing down the stretch. And until they potentially meet Alabama in the conference championship game there, I don't think that they're going to pose much of a threat. So Georgia here, I think, is going to be an exciting team to watch. Bulldogs, you might finally pull off that season. Georgia has been so close to being a team that can compete there at the top tier level of the SEC. Lots of memorable season there for Georgia, and they've just barely missed out. Maybe this is the year that they can pull it off. We'll talk about that when we get to the end of the video here, but very excited to see what the Georgia Bulldogs can do. All right, Kentucky Wildcats, we talked about a top-tier team in the conference. Let's talk about a bottom-tier team in the conference. 5-6 last season, 8-5 the year before that. That 2019 8-5 was actually a pretty exciting season for the Wildcats, at least in my opinion. At least they're a team that doesn't usually show that level of moderate success. But 5-6 last season, they lose their starting quarterback, only 5 players back on offense, only 4 players back on defense. It's very weird looking at the SEC the way way it worked out. Not a lot of players taking advantage of that COVID return policy that the SEC allowed, that extension that that players got to play one more year, even if they were on a senior year. When you look at the other conferences, they're returning. Some teams are returning 21 starters. 22 starters. Some teams are returning everybody across the board. So most teams are returning at least 10 to 14. But this is the third team that we've looked at here who really isn't returning that many starters, or has at least one position unit with less than 5 starters coming back here. So Kentucky only 5 starters back on offense, 4 back on defense, lose their starting quarterback and their starting running back. I just think it's going to be a very disappointing season here. 7-5, 3-5 is what Athlon Sports is projecting. I think it's going to be worse than that. I think it's going to be 6-6, 2-6. As they do manage to get bowl eligible, but just barely. They luck out with a pretty easy non-conference schedule with games against ULM, Chattanooga FCS team there, and New Mexico State. So that should not pose a threat. And a game against Louisville as well. None of those teams should pose a threat in any way. They should be able to blow through all of those. And they do draw an easier slate here in the SEC with wins against South Carolina, I think, Vanderbilt as well, and potentially a win against Mississippi State, though I think that's probably going to end up being a loss. But just not a great Kentucky team coming back. I think that Mark Stoops here is going to really have to work hard. It's coming into his 9th season. He's done some good things, kind of reestablishing Kentucky as at least a mid-level team, but I think that they are going to be towards the bottom of SEC this year. All right, Lsu Tigers. Exceptionally easy schedule again. That's kind of been the trend here so far. Sorry, easy schedule as far as SEC standards goes. Top conference in the SEC, but easy compared to a lot of other teams on this schedule. 5-5 last season, 6-6 year before that. Athlon Sports has them going 8-4, 4-4. I think it can be better than that. I think they can go 9-3, 5-3. Of course, a team that was able to jump into the college football playoff rankings last season before kind of losing some games there down the stretch. So I think this is a team that can push and have a good season, but it's not necessarily because they're a great team. Only 7 players back on offense, 6 players back on defense, so a better starters back overall than the teams we've looked at already, but they do lose their starting running back, which I think is going to hurt them, as well as 2 of their top receivers there. So I do think that is going to hurt them a little bit there. But it's looking up at the beginning. Look, let me read the schedule to you. Central Michigan should be a win. Kentucky should be a win. Southeast Missouri State, win. Boston College, win. Tennessee and North Texas. I mean, they open up with one of the 5 easiest opening game stretches of any team in the country. Might have a chance to get into the top 25. I do expect them to jump into the top 25 here. Before playing Texas A&M, which will be a loss. Then they play Vanderbilt, a little bit of recovery. Georgia should be a loss. South Carolina, easy win. Florida loss, and then Arkansas a win. So I think that this is a team that is worse than this 9-3 schedule, playing a more tougher conference or even a tougher non-conference schedule. This could be a team going 7-5, but this year with such an easy schedule down the stretch here, I think this is a team that can easily go 9-3 and get into a nice bowl game there towards the end of the season. Now that might be where the weakness shows up at the end of the year, might end up showing a weak showing in the bowl game. But hopefully with enough momentum coming in and experience growing and being a better team towards the end of the year than at least they were at the beginning, they might be able to put up a good showing. All right, South Carolina Gamecocks, 2-8 record, 4-8 last year, of course, firing their coach halfway through the season, which was really weird considering that it was a COVID year. I would have thought that teams would have given their coaches a exemption that season, considering all the challenges that they were having to deal with. But South Carolina finally decided enough is enough. Put in Shane Beamer here coming in with his first season with the team. It'll be interesting to see what he can do. Athlon Sports is projecting 5-7, 2-6, but this is a team that's been on a downward trend for a long time. It's a team that doesn't return their starting quarterback, even though they do have 7 players back on defense and 6 back on offense. And they do return their starting running back, who's able to rush for over 1,100 yards. I think they're going to lean heavily into Kevin Harris there, their running back. So I think it's going to be South Carolina's going to be pushing heavy into the run game, but it's just not a team that I think it's going to take a few years to get South Carolina back into being a mid-level SEC team, and I think it's going to be a long time before they start being a top-tier SEC team if they're able to get to that. I think they can open up with wins here against Eastern Illinois and East Carolina, as the trend is with SEC teams. Pretty easy non-conference schedule, just because the conference schedule is so difficult. But then I think it's going to be a pretty tough stretch here. Losses to Georgia, Kentucky, Troy, who's I think is going to be a pretty decent Sun Belt team, and I think can win against this vulnerable South Carolina team. Losses to Tennessee, pulling off a win against Vanderbilt, but then losses the rest of the season here, coming down the final stretch. So I think another disappointing season for Gamecocks. Gamecocks fans. I don't think that that is reflective of Beamer. I do think that's reflective of the team he's taking over, and I hope that in the next maybe 4 years, he might be able to develop South Carolina into a team that can compete for bowl games and being a mid-level SEC team at the very least. Okay, Tennessee Volunteers. Jeremy Pruitt getting the short end of the stick, especially getting fired during the COVID year. I was really excited about Jeremy Pruitt, and I think if he'd just been given a couple more years with Tennessee, pulled a couple of rough breaks, lost some games that they shouldn't. I think that it was, 2019, I think they lost to Georgia Southern at the beginning of the season. So several losses that they shouldn't have lost, but they were really close to a lot of teams. I thought that under Jeremy Pruitt, it was a Tennessee team that was one of the more competent and competitive Tennessee teams that at least in recent history here, especially at least Tennessee is a storied program with a lot of heritage in the past, but the recent history of Tennessee has been garbage. And I thought that Tennessee had really kind of established themselves at a better pace with Jeremy Pruitt. I was very surprised to see him get fired. 8-5 in 2019. 3-7 last year, which really I don't think was his fault. COVID did a lot of things to teams. One of the biggest things it did is it knocked out practice schedules, and it made teams really struggle. Now, a lot of lower tier teams were able to take advantage of that, because I do think that the loss of practices affected the higher end teams. But teams that were just trying to get their feet under them, just getting their momentum established under new coaches or recently hired coaches at least, really got the wind knocked out of them again. I think Jeremy Pruitt would have put up a much bigger year if it had been a regular season. Unfortunately, he's gone. Josh Huppel is in now, first season. Athlon Sports projects a 6-6, 2-6 team. I think the recruits that Jeremy Pruitt was able to bring in and the success that he was able to start pushing towards with Tennessee is going to pay dividends and allow Tennessee to have a decent year at 7-5, 3-5 overall. The biggest thing that's going to hurt them is that they only have 2 starters back on offense. They return a left tackle and a right tackle, but they return the least starters of any team I have seen in college football, and I'm at the end, pretty much the end of my review videos. As far as offense goes, only 2 stars back on offense, 5 back on defense, so it's going to be a pretty much completely new team. So those recruiting years under Jeremy Pruitt are really going to pay off, I think, a little bit here. It's a decently easy schedule, at least the opening bit here. Bowling Green, Pittsburgh, Tennessee Tech, all those pretty low-level teams. Pittsburgh, of course, being an ACC team, but a team that is vulnerable. I think they can get the win there. Before they start on a disappointing stretch with losses to Florida and Missouri, recover against South Carolina before going on another stretch against Ole Miss and Alabama, gain their footing again against Kentucky here before losing to Georgia. But then I think they finish off the season with the nice wins against South Alabama and Vanderbilt. So it is a decently easy schedule. Definitely a bowl-eligible Tennessee team for sure. And I think they can go and be competitive in a bowl game. I think this is a Tennessee Volunteer team that if they can give their head coach time, if they cannot be too hasty like they were under Jeremy Pruitt, give him 3 years. If they can give Josh Huppel 3 years, I think that he can turn this team, who I think was only a couple years away from being a mid-level team in the SEC. I'm not sure what I'm going to see out of Josh Huppel. I'm not sure if he's going to be the same caliber coach as Jeremy Pruitt was, but I think they can give him 3 years. This is going to be a Tennessee team that's going to have a big turnaround. I'm excited for the future to see what ends up happening here for the Volunteers. All right, Vanderbilt Commodore is one of the worst teams in college football, or at least in the Power 5, and they're the Kansas of the SEC, or the Purdue of the SEC, whatever you want to call them. 0-9 last season, 3-9 the year before that. A team that's constantly struggled, of course, pulling off those PR gimmicks last season towards the end of the year in the kicking situation. So I think this is going to be a team that is again going to have difficulty down the stretch. The 2-10, 0-8 is what's being projected here for Vanderbilt by Athlon. I think that's fair. 2-10, 0-8 is what I see as well. I see some wins here against Eastern Tennessee State University, or ETSU here, FCS team, and a win against Connecticut, who's going to be one of the period worst teams in college football here. But I think they can pull off wins against that. But losses across the board, including to Mountain West team Colorado State. I think that this is going to be a team that a lot of teams are going to be licking their chops to come in, get a nice, easy, kind of almost practice week as they get a chance to come in and blow out big. 6 starters back on defense, 8 back on offense, including the starting quarterback. A quarterback who had a decent year last year with almost 2,000 yards passing, but it's just going to be another one of those seasons where I think it just ends up being disappointing here for Vanderbilt. Clark Lee, coming into his first season, has got his work cut out for him. I think maybe he has a chance to turn this program around. I don't know much about him, so we'll have to see how that turns out. But a team that's going to have a very disappointing season, I think. All right, Alabama Crimson Tide. I think this is what a lot of you have been waiting for. SEC team, top tier team, the flagship team of college football. Nick Saban, of course, we know the SEC stands for the Saban Enrichment Conference. 13-0, 8-0 is what Athlon Sports is projecting. 13-0, 10-0 last season, 11-2 the season before that. I think we see another one of those years, 13-0, 8-0. Of course, Nick Saban breaking in both a new quarterback and a new rehab offensive coordinator this year. New offensive coordinator coming in, Bill O'Brien, former head coach over at Houston, the NFL team, that is, not the Houston Rockets over at, sorry, that's NBA. Not Houston Cougars? Is that what? I think that's the AAC team. Anyhow, not the Group of Five Houston. No, the NFL Houston team. This is a head coach coming in an offensive coordinator coming in who has a lot of experience, who's done great things in his career. Who would have thought that an NFL coach would come in and be an offensive coordinator? That really shows Nick Saban, the highest paid coach in college football and the best coach in college football, I believe. I'm not a Saban fan by any stretch, but I can respect game. He is an incredible coach. And I think he's going to do great things. It really doesn't seem to matter who, even though Alabama only returns 3 starters on offense and 8 starters, they do have 8 starters back on defense. Even though they only return 3 starters back on offense, it really doesn't seem to matter who is wearing that red and white uniform. Alabama has success every single year. It's also not an incredibly tough schedule with a game. Well, I say that, but SEC standards, at least non-conference, it is decently tough here. They did go out and schedule Miami, so big game there, of course, with Miami having a quarterback there who's played very, very well the last few seasons, signing that huge NIL deal there. Derek King, of course, signing that huge NIL deal. So he's a great quarterback. But I think Bryce Young is going to be another quarterback that comes in and takes right up in the footsteps of all the great Alabama quarterbacks of the past years. So win against Miami, Mercer University, Florida, Southern Miss, an easy non-conference game there. Ole Miss might present a slight challenge. Ole Miss has had their number in the last few years, but that was when Hugh Freeze was the head coach, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Texas A&M is going to be a little bit of a challenging game, as it comes down the stretch here, but I don't think it should present too much of an issue. Mississippi State, Tennessee, LSU, New Mexico State, and Arkansas. That brings us to the final game that's going to be of interest. So the previous 2 games that are on the schedule that really pose a potential threat to Alabama are Florida and Texas A&M, especially with that Texas A&M game. I think that Texas A&M has a chance to take a step forward and potentially challenge Alabama here, though I do think Alabama pulls off the win in both of those. Auburn, that's a rivalry game. No more Gus Malzahn, but Bryan Harsin, former Boise State head coach, is the head coach there. I'm going to leave my preview of that until I get to the Auburn section here, which should be coming up. Coming up in 2 teams. I'm going to leave my in-depth analysis until I get to that section, but that is not a game that Alabama wants to overlook. Alabama, definitely the better team, and definitely Nick Saban being the best coach in the country, definitely the better coach team, even though I have huge respect for Bryan Harsin and think he's an incredible coach. But that is a game that could present more of a challenge than most people are expecting, and a game that I think Alabama will win, but that could present, like I said, more of a challenge and could be a much more competitive game, much closer win than most people are projecting. But 13-0, 8-0, number 1 in the nation in the preseason poll, well-deserved. I think they'll hold on to that throughout the season and come into the end of the season there, top 4 in the country with a chance to go in and win the national championship, just like they pretty much have a chance every single year. Make sure you stick around. Make sure you, not just for my projection of who's going to win the SEC this year, but make sure you stick around and like and subscribe, because I'm going to have another video when I'm done with all this series. I'm going to have another video coming out that talks about that race for the playoffs and who I think is going to be those teams in competition for that, and the team that I think is going to be able to go out there and pull off the national championship victory. So make sure you like and subscribe. It's not just Boise State content, general college football content. Even though it is Boise State heavy, I do have general college football content like this series that comes out throughout the season. All right, Arkansas Razorbacks. So 3-7 last year, 2-10 the year before that. Athlon thinks they're going to have a little bit of a recovery. 8 players back on offense, 9 back on defense, but they don't return their starting quarterback and they don't return their starting running back. I think that's going to hurt them. Sam Pittman coming into his second year really didn't get to establish himself in that COVID year. I think he is going to have a chance for a better season. Athlon, like I said, projecting 6-6, 3-5. I don't see that. This is still an Arkansas team, in my estimate, that lost to that has had a lot of losses over the last few years, especially in 2019, losing, I believe it was to San Jose State. So this is a Arkansas team that has struggled in the recent history, has been a little bit of downward slope. I do think that with a new head coach coming in here in Sam Pittman, they have a chance to recover and move forward to being at least a mid-level team in the SEC. But I just don't see that happening this year. I think 3-9, 0-8 is more probable. I think they can pull off wins here against Rice, Georgia Southern, and Arkansas Pine Bluff. But it is a pretty tough conference, regular season conference schedule. Texas A&M, that should be a loss. Georgia, a loss. Auburn, I think that will definitely be a loss. Ole Miss should be a loss as well. Mississippi State, LSU, Alabama, Missouri. The games that Arkansas might be able to challenge, and I think they'll be close in, is Missouri, Mississippi State here, and Ole Miss, with chances to win those games. But I think in the end it's going to be a losses there. Though I could see this being a team that does manage to pull off that 6-6. Overall, I think the more likely decision is that it's going to be 3-9, 0-8. All right. Auburn Tigers. This is the team that I've been looking forward to the most. The team I have the most stake in. Big Boise State fan, of being a huge fan of Bryan Harsin. I don't begrudge him at all moving on to fairer plains there over in the SEC. He had some issues with the Boise State administration. I think the Auburn administration will really throw everything at him that he needs and give him a little bit more support there. So huge props to Bryan Harsin for what he did at Boise State, and excited to see what he did for Auburn. First season for Boise State was able to bring us to a Fiesta Bowl, 12-2 record overall, and a win over Arizona. So I think that he is going to surprise a lot of people here at Auburn. 6-5 record last season when they let Gus Malzahn go, and a 9-4 season the year before that. So an Auburn team that has big expectations of themselves, a team that's been able to beat top-tier teams in the SEC, such as memorable games against Alabama, especially that memorable one where they were able to return the field goal attempt for a touchdown. Still one of the greatest games of all time. So exciting to see what can end up happening here with Auburn. 9 players back on offense, 7 players back on defense. The most key returner back here is Bo Nix, who he had a great year last year with over 2,400 yards passing. His freshman year, that same year as his freshman season, he was considered one of the top freshmen in the country. Of course, that was the same freshman season. That was the same freshman season as Hank Bachmeier there. Both of them starting out their freshman year. ESPN was doing a lot of graphics comparing them. And then I think Hank Bachmeier at least got hurt, and I think Bo Nix didn't finish the season necessarily as well as they thought he would. But I think Bryan Harsin has done an incredible job of developing quarterbacks at Boise State. He worked with Ryan Finley. He worked, though, of course, Ryan Finley ended up going to NC State and got his real development there, but he did work with Ryan Finley. He worked with Grant Hendricks. He worked with Brett Rippon, and he worked with Hank Bachmeier and Jack Sears. I think that this is a coach who's able to do great. Former Boise State quarterback himself, the offensive coordinator during Boise State's memorable Fiesta Bowl win against Oklahoma. So this is a coach who has a storied heritage, a storied past, has done a great job of developing quarterbacks. As a head coach and as offensive coordinator, of course, he worked with Jared Zabransky in that season that they went and won the Fiesta Bowl. So I think this is a coach who has done great things. And 7-5, 3-5 records, what Athlon Sports is projecting, I don't agree with that at all. I think that this is an Auburn team. If you really want to see my full preview of kind of what I expect out of Bryan Harsin, I'll put the link in the description. You can go watch my video where I react to him leaving Boise State and give kind of a little bit of projection of what he may do at Auburn. But this is a coach who is able to really put in a nice balanced attack, who's able to work well with the pieces that he has, and with an SEC recruiting class, an SEC players on a roster. I think he's going to do incredible things. Who achieved high level of success at Boise State, a coach who appreciates a balanced attack, mixing in the run and the pass, but he also has a lot of creativity. You'll see a lot of offensive line shifts. You'll see a lot of tight end shifts is what I meant to say there. A lot of creativity as far as the passing game, spreading the ball around. Boise State has always had several receivers getting over 200 yards receiving at least. You're going to see tight ends involved in the passing game every single year. Boise State's usually had at least one tight end there who's gotten over 100 yards receiving. You're going to see trick plays, I think, mix in a little bit. Boise State's been known for its trickery, and I think Bryan Harsin is going to bring that with him. So looking at their schedule here, I think that they can open up in a really nice stretch with wins against Akron, Alabama State, and Georgia State. Penn State is a game that most people are expecting Auburn to go in and lose. They're going to have to go play at Penn State, but Penn State looks vulnerable to me after having a kind of disappointing season last season. I think that Bryan Harsin is a better coach than the Penn State coach. I think that they have a chance to go in here highly motivated, a lot of expectations, trying to put his team together. I think that they're going to be able to go in there and pull off a win at Penn State. That's my kind of out on the limb projection for them here. LSU looks to be a little bit of a down team. I think they are vulnerable. I think that Auburn, a well-coached Auburn team with the pieces that they've had. Gus Malzahn, his real issue wasn't necessarily that he didn't have the pieces. It's just that he didn't have the consistency. I mean, every year he would lose games that he was expected to win. Last season, lost to South Carolina, of course, being pretty devastating. Lose games that he was expected to win and just wasn't able to develop the consistency he was expected at Auburn. But he had the pieces on his team to have success and just never got pulled off, which is why I think the administration got tired of him. So that Bryan Harsin is not picking up a project team. He's picking up a team that has a lot of excellence, a lot of potential in them. And so I think we're going to see that here with a win pulled off against LSU. They will drop the game to Georgia, who's just an incredible team here. But Arkansas, Ole Miss should not present too much of an issue. Texas A&M, I think, is going to be a little bit too much for them. But Mississippi State and South Carolina should be no issue, and I think they are going to threaten there in Alabama. So I think this is a team, like I said, a lot of people down on Auburn. I was a little surprised not to see them in the preseason top 25. I thought that they deserved at least a number 25 slot. But Bryan Harsin, don't sleep on Bryan Harsin. I saw some Facebook posts describing him as a chump from Boise State. He's definitely not that. He is a coach who has an incredible track record, did great things at Boise State and Arkansas State, who I think was a top group of 5 coach, and he's definitely definitely a good Power 5 coach. I think that he's going to achieve some great 9-3 record. I think is very, very doable here for Auburn with the coaching staff they have. Of course, they dropped that Penn State game. They might end up losing the game to LSU as well. So a 8-4 would also be in the cards, but I think that under Bryan Harsin, Auburn's going to finally be able to develop into being the team that the Tiger fans expect to see and have expected to see for a long time here out of Auburn. I think that so this season 9-3, exciting first year. Might see a little bit of a drop off next season as they kind of adjust through a new quarterback. I don't expect Bo Nix to stay around for his senior year, so I think that next season potential drop off there. But then I think going forward, this is going to be a team that Bryan Harsin is going to develop and going to bring in. He is a great recruiter, an incredible recruiter. He's going to bring in great recruits to this program. So I am excited to see Auburn, what they're going to be looking like going forward. I'm a Boise State fan, and I'll always be a Boise State fan. And I'm not necessarily an Auburn fan, though I do have an uncle who went to Auburn. So I followed them for a while. So I'm not necessarily a Tigers fan, but I'm a Bryan Harsin fan, and I'm going to be watching every one of Auburn's games this year. I'm excited to see what happens here. So Auburn fans, I'm right there with you, hoping that it's going to be a great season. And I think Bryan Harsin can do great things for this program. All right, this is going to be one of my longer videos, but it's the best conference in college football. You can't get by it quickly. You have to go in depth. So I apologize for that, but I think we're going to have to keep on moving along here and just deal with the depth at the length as it is. So LSU Tigers, number 16 in the preseason polls there. 5-5 last season, a disappointing year for them after going 15-0 under Joe Burrows. But that Joe Burrows is no more. And LSU was not a team that competed at that level before Joe Burrows came. And I think, especially after losing so many coaching pieces of that team, at Oregon, I think he rode the coattails of Joe Burrows there heavy. Great call from bringing him in, but that team's success was entirely on Joe Burrows. Without Joe Burrows, they are a 5-5 team, a team that can't even beat Mississippi State, Missouri, Auburn, and not a good Auburn team last season. Texas A&M or Alabama, those are good teams that they lost to, but a team that can't even beat Mississippi State, Missouri, or Auburn. 9-3, 5-3 is what Athlon Sports is projecting, but I just don't see that. They lost their starting quarterback. They lost their starting running back. They lost their starting tight ends there. So this is a team that's having to replace a lot of pieces. I think 8-4, 4-4 is closer. I think LSU is going to be lucky to get out with a middle of the top 8-4, 4-4 overall record. I think they will open up. They have an easy non-conference schedule here that I think they can get a lot of wins here to start the season. Games against UCLA, McNeese State, Central Michigan, and Mississippi State. But I do think they'll drop that game to Auburn, snag a win against Kentucky, lose to Florida, grab a win against Ole Miss before losing to Alabama. Finish off the season with wins against Arkansas and ULM before dropping the final season game to Texas A&M. So I'm pretty close to what Athlon's projecting, so I do believe they think that LSU is going to beat Auburn, and that's where that extra win is going to come in. So I'm not too far off what Athlon's projecting, but I think that this is an LSU Tiger team that they're going to get that 8-4 record because of some easy schedule inconsistencies here, with that easy non-conference schedule, and then the wins against the kind of lower end of the SEC. But I think it's an LSU team that's going to continue on a little bit of a downward slump here, and I don't expect them, at least not at Oregon, I don't expect them going forward here in the future to attain that kind of 15-0 success, or even the levels of success that they saw under Les Miles before he was let go. So will be interesting to see what can go on. If you're a Tigers fan, I hope that, Ed Oregon, I like Ed Oregon. I think his press conferences are funny. You can barely understand what he's saying. But it's just, I'm not trying to be mean-spirited here, but playing off the cards, going off what I'm seeing, especially after last year and what Joe Burrows was able to do. I really think it was on him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and LSU is definitely one of those teams that has the potential to prove me wrong. Like I said at the beginning, I think there might be some teams here that I'm calling low that might shoot high, and this might be one of those teams. We'll just have to see as the season pushes forward. All right, Mississippi State Bulldogs under Mike Leach. I love Mike Leach. He gives the best press conferences of any coach in college football. I loved him over at Washington State. I mean, he has hilarious press conferences. You'll ask him how his defense did, and he'll start talking about aliens. I mean, an outstanding, funny guy, a big supporter of his. I really root for him every year. I think that this Mississippi State team that has struggled in recent years, 4-7 season last year, 6-7 the year before that. They brought Mike Leach in because they wanted to have that as coach who could come in and spark some life into the program, bring some excitement and some notoriety to the program, which he has done that. Of course, after they won that LSU game, they did the bandwagon video, which they then went ahead and lost 4 games in a row. So that was kind of bad timing. But he is a coach that sparks controversy. Well, not so much controversy, but he gets out there. His humorous clips end up on YouTube, and you end up seeing them. So he's an exciting player who's able to bring in, exciting coach who's able to bring in good players. Returns 8 players on offense and 8 players on defense. Athlon Sports is projecting 6-6, 3-5. I do think that he has the caliber and the coaching talent, especially the recruiting talent, to get Mississippi State back to being a team that can win 8 or 9 games a season. But I just don't think that's going to be this year. Last season really didn't get to establish himself with the COVID year, throwing a wrench into things. So really I'm really counting this as his first year. So I think you're going to see kind of a first year kind of project here out of Mississippi State. 6-6, 3-5 is what I see as well. But I think they're going to be a few points off or close wins away from being better than that. I think they'll pull off a win here against Louisiana Tech, lose to NC State, a game that they can win, but I just think that NC State's going to be a good enough team here to pull off that win, especially since, like I said, Mike Leach, really counting this as his first year, really think he's still going to be developing this team, especially he does have his starting quarterback coming back, but he's still trying to establish his style into this team. So I do think they pull off the loss. They do end up with a loss against NC State. Pull off a win against a decent Memphis team out of the American Athletic Conference before losing games to LSU, Texas A&M, and Alabama. Going a little bit of a streak here down the middle of the season, wins against Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Arkansas before dropping games against Auburn and Ole Miss. Should be able to pick up their cupcake win against Tennessee State. But I do think that they're going to be a few points off. I think this is a team that could end up going 7-5 or 8-4 if some things tend to end up working out. I'm excited to see what happens, and I'll definitely be ringing the bell and rooting on. Well, actually, figurative bell. I'm not a Mississippi State fan. I don't actually have a bell, but I'll be excited to see what Mississippi State can end up here. I'll definitely be rooting them on from my home as I watch Mike Leach, and I love to see what he can pull off. So definitely, hey, even if you're not a Mississippi State fan, make sure you tune in for some of his press conferences. It is worth the time. Ole Miss Rebels, Lane Kiffin coming in last year went 5-5, 4-8 the year before that. Athlon Sports projecting 8-4, 4-4 overall. They do return their starting quarterback, Matt Corral, who's being rated as one of the best quarterbacks in SEC. I think he is going to be a great quarterback with over 3,300 yards passing last season. So 8 players back on offense, 7 players back on defense. They do return their starting quarterback and their starting running back, which is going to be huge for them. So Athlon Sports is projecting 8-4, 4-4 SEC. I'm going to agree with that 4-4 record. I do think this is an Ole Miss team that could end up being a lot better than that. It's a team that has a lot of potential. Lane Kiffin, I think, is a very exciting coach who installs a very exciting, high-speed, explosive offense into his teams. I'm excited to see what he can do, but I think there's going to be one more loss in the non-conference than is being expected here by the experts. So let's just walk it through, and I'll talk about it when I get there. A win against Louisville, Austin Peay, Tulane to start the season. Alabama. Of course, his former partner there, Lane Kiffin, of course, being going through the rehab program over there with being an offensive coordinator for Nick Saban. I think he's going to end up losing to his former mentor there before pulling off wins against Arkansas and Tennessee. LSU and Auburn, I think, are going to be challenged. Auburn, a game that I think they can definitely win, but like I said, I think that Auburn's going to be much better than expected. I think Bryan Harsin is going to keep them in the game long enough to be able to pull off the win. Bo Nix, an incredible quarterback. That's going to be an exciting quarterback competition to be able to see him. Bo Nix versus Matt Corral. I think that's going to be a very, very exciting game, but I think Auburn will be the victor in that matchup. Now, loss here to Texas A&M, win against Vanderbilt, and a win against Mississippi State. That leaves one game on the schedule I didn't mention, November 6th matchup against Liberty. Liberty coming into Ole Miss. This is Hugh Freeze returning to his former school. Hugh Freeze, one of the top coaches in the country, even though he's coaching over at Liberty, who is a new team to the FBS. He has done incredible things, turned around a team. I went to Liberty. I know I'm a Boise State fan, but I ended up not being able to attend due to the fact they didn't have Air Force ROTC at Boise State. So I ended up going to Liberty. So that's my alma mater there. I am an LU Flames fan. So I know a lot about their program. I've watched their games over the years here, and they really, really struggled there initially in their first FBS season before Hugh Freeze came and took things over and has just totally revolutionized that program. Of course, brought in the former Auburn quarterback Malik Willis, who is a dark horse for the Heisman this year. I think Liberty, I was extremely surprised. Well, I'm not surprised because of the heavy bias that seems to be against Liberty among the AP voters, both last season and going into this season, and even not just AP, but the college football playoff voters as well. So I was not surprised in that sense, but I was surprised in the fact that Coastal Carolina got ranked ahead of them and LU didn't. That's another story. I'm going off on a tangent. Malik Willis, incredible quarterback back. Liberty returns pretty much all of their starters on offense and defense. They're going to be an incredibly tough team. Overall, Auburn, I think, is going to have the bigger, faster players in this matchup, but it comes down to wits. It comes down to coaching. Liberty, a team that was able to beat Virginia Tech last year, a team that was able to beat Syracuse, a team that almost beat NC State. Hugh Freeze is a mastermind. He's an incredible coach. Of course, Ole Miss fans, you know that. A coach who was able to beat Alabama twice. I believe he's the only coach, one of the only coaches in the nation that can say that they were able to do that in recent years at least. So he's an incredible head coach, has really gone through, turned his life around and done great things with Liberty, and I think he's going to come in here, be highly motivated. This is a game that I would love to see, a game that I was predicting preseason, a chance maybe. I think there's a chance that they might end up having College game day here because it is a huge matchup. Liberty, I think, has a chance to be ranked. Ole Miss, coming into this game, I don't believe will be ranked just because of the losses to LSU and Auburn here that I'm projecting. But this is a Liberty team that has a chance to be ranked. It's going to be an incredibly tough matchup. They're a really good team, and Hugh Freeze is an amazing head coach. So I think Liberty is going to pull off the upset. I'm sorry, Ole Miss fans, but I think that Liberty, I think they're going to surprise a lot of people, and they're going to be able to come in and pull off the upset. Regardless, it's going to be a very, very close game, and I'm excited to see what happens for both these team seasons. Prior to that Liberty game, I'll be the biggest Ole Miss fan because I want them to be looking great when they come in there to play Liberty. But we'll see what happens. Like I said, Matt Corral going to be an outstanding quarterback, going to really press that Liberty defense and defenses of all the teams he plays. But I think that it's going to be an offensive powerhouse battle here. Of course, Ole Miss not doing great on defense with multiple games giving up here of 30-plus points. I mean, they had 51 points against Florida, 41 against Kentucky. That's not great. 63 against Alabama, 33 against Arkansas, 35 against Auburn, 42 against South Carolina. That's really bad. And 53 against LSU. So it's a defense, even though we returned 7 starters, it's a defense that I believe is still going to continue to struggle again this season. and I think that a quarterback like Malik Willis, his caliber, is going to be able to take advantage of that if he's healthy. So this is going to be an exciting matchup, and Ole Miss fans, my projection 7-5, 4-4, but I wish you all the best, at least prior to and after that Liberty game. All right, Texas A&M Aggies, and we are one team away from being done with this. I'm pushing on for my longest videos ever, but like I said, best conference, lot to preview, lot to analyze. Texas A&M Aggies rated number 6 in those preseason rankings. Great season last year. Only a loss to Alabama there in the regular season, 24-52, but winning every other game down the stretch, 8-5 the year before that. So really took a huge step forward under Jimbo Fisher there, of course, former Florida State coach there. Really took a big step forward under Jimbo Fisher. 10-2, 6-2 is what Athlon Sports is projecting. I think that last year was not a fluke for Texas A&M. Even though they only returned 6 stars on offense, they returned 9 stars back on defense, which was a really good defense last year, holding multiple teams to under 20 points. So this is a team that I think was very good on defense, going to be competitive again, especially with all those starters back. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at the quarterback position. If that position comes back strong, I think that this is going to be a Texas A&M game that's going to have another incredible season. Of course, returning their main running back here in Isaiah Spiller. I'm projecting 11-1, 7-1 SEC. So I think they pull off one more win than Athlon is projecting here. Pretty easy non-conference schedule, wins against Kent State, Colorado, and New Mexico. Before getting into the regular season conference schedule here, wins against Arkansas and Mississippi State. I do think they'll drop that game against Alabama, but they will be competitive in that matchup, and they will have a chance to pull off the win. But I think Alabama comes in strong in the second half and pulls away by a large margin there. Missouri, South Carolina, Auburn, Ole Miss, Prairie View A&M, and LSU should all be wins. That Auburn game, not one they can sleep on. Bryan Harsin will have a chance to pull off the upset, but I think other than that, they're going to pull off wins in every game other than that Alabama game. So I'm very excited to see what Texas A&M happens here. Jimbo Fisher coming into his 4th year, I think has his team going in the right direction. It'll be exciting to see what happens with these Aggies. All right, so looking at overall, where does this put the teams coming in predicted order finish? Athlon Sports is projecting Georgia number 1, Florida number 2, Missouri number 3, Kentucky number 4, Tennessee number 5, South Carolina number 6, and Vanderbilt number 7. I'm going to stay the course on pretty much all of that with agreeing with Georgia number 1, Florida number 2, Missouri number 3. I'm going to put Tennessee at number 4 and Kentucky at number 5, but then same for Gamecocks at number 6 and the Vanderbilt at number 7. All right, we're coming in here on the West Division. Athlon Sports projecting Alabama number 1, Texas A&M number 2, LSU number 3, Ole Miss number 4, Auburn number 5, Arkansas number 7, and Mississippi State number 6. This is where we get a little bit of difference. I do agree on the top 2 teams being Alabama and Texas A&M, but I think that Auburn is going to surprise a lot of people, pull off more wins than is expected. Athlon Sports projecting them at 3-5 SEC. I think they can go 5-3 SEC. I'm going to put Auburn at number 3. I'm going to put Ole Miss at number 4. I'm going to put LSU at number 5. I think they're going to have another bit of a disappointing season here, and then Mississippi State number 6 and Arkansas at last at number 7. Now, Athlon Sports is projecting Alabama winning over Georgia. I think that if any year Georgia was going to do it, this is the year. This is the year that they can do it. I think this is the year that they're going to be very close. Having said that, though, you can't go against Nick Saban. You really can't pick against him. He's a coach who manages to pull it off every single year, even when he's not supposed to be able to do it. Even Alabama hasn't had a rebuilding season underneath him, period. They've always been at the top of their league, at the top of their division, and had great seasons, even if they haven't necessarily, even though they haven't won the national championship every year. They have been one of those teams that has been at the top in their division or towards the top in their division. So I think Alabama will keep on winning until Nick Saban retires there. And I think that they're going to be able to win this game against Georgia, but it's going to be incredibly close. And I think it could be going either way out of this entire conference. I think Georgia has the best shot of beating Alabama. And I think that if anyone's going to do it, Georgia could. So I'll be watching the game with great interest. It's going to be the best conference championship game, bar none, towards the end of the season there, even though there's going to be a lot of interesting ones. This one's going to be one of the best pushing down the season, and I think both these teams are potential playoff teams towards the end of the year, regardless who wins. So make sure you watch my video after I'm done with all these when I talk about that race for the playoffs. But thank you for watching my video today. I know this was longer than usual. Make sure you like and subscribe if you like the comment. Give me your comments, feedback. Give me your feedback in the comments below. I'll be excited to go through and read that. Give me your projection for what you think your team's going to do. Tell me where I was wrong. If you want to, you can let me know where you were right, where I was right, or you think that I was right. be excited to see what happens towards the end of the season here and how things go for the SEC. But thank you for watching my video, and as always, go Big Blue.